Kevin, how are you? Glad to see you representing your Nikes and stuff.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Hey, nice to meet you too.
So as far as we know, Matthew is good to call him.
Yeah, I know.
Does like if he has issues, is he going to text me? Because the speaker system is
Good morning. The commission meeting will start shortly. During the meeting, the phone will be in listen only mode except during public comment at the beginning and the end of the meeting. Thank you.
somebody in San Jose is looking for you. Thanks, Louise. I'll keep up with you. She said, oh, no. Dr. Keith is out for the meeting.
What about it? They're gonna
Good morning, everybody. Today is January 29th, 2019, at 9 a.m. We are in the Grant Sawyer State Office Building in room 2450, and today is the regularly scheduled hearing for the Nevada Athletic Commission. I'd like to call the meeting to order and take a roll call. Commissioner Alonso. Here. Commissioner Alt. Here. Commissioner Hahn. Here. Commissioner Macbeth. Here. Great. Moving on to item C. Is there any public comment in the room? All these people here and I don't have any public comment? Man. Is there any public comment on the phone? Is there any public comment on the phone? Okay, we'll close the line. Thank you. We'll move on to item D, the minutes. I'd look for a motion of the approval of the minutes of the meeting of December 10th, 2018.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. All right.
Great, motion passes unanimously. Item E, the consent agenda. I would look for a motion on the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second. All in favor? All right, motion passes unanimously. Okay, moving on to new business. A request by Benoit Roussel for a boxing judge license per NAC 467062. Benoit, are you in the?
He's on the telephone, Chair.
On the telephone. Okay, great. Good morning, Benoit. How are you? Oh, we'll open the line. Hold on one second.
Okay, 1 second.
The conference is no longer in listen-only mode. This is Benoit. Very good, thank you.
Where are you calling in from this morning? Benoit, can you hear me?
Yes,
Where are you calling in from this morning?
I'm calling from Montreal.
Oh, wow. Do you have a code? You guys are way too serious. Benoit, why don't you tell the commission a little bit about yourself and your license application this morning, if you could, please, sir.
I was a amateur boxer for about 3 years. I had 16-5 records. I won the Quebec Golden Glove 1 year, finalist next year. After that, I judged about 50 amateur fights. And since 2004, I'm a pro judge. And as of today, I've got 643 fights judged. Over 206 boxing shows.
see that you have a lot of MMA experience. Is the application strictly for a boxing referee, or I'm sorry, judge?
As of right now, it's boxing only.
Okay, are there any questions for any commissioners? For Mr. Roussel?
Nope, not at all. That's good.
I love my telephone. Are there any questions from any of the commissioners up here for Mr. Roussel? No? I only have one other question for you, Mr. Roussel, and I believe it's in our packet, but I want to make sure that you have read the Nevada Athletic Commission Code of Conduct, that you understand that, and that you commit to adhering to that.
Absolutely.
Okay, great, thank you. If there's no other questions from the commissioners, Executive Director Bennett, do you have anything you'd like to add?
In addition to his outstanding record and prior to becoming a professional judge, he's also judged championship fights in various countries to include but not limited to Canada, the USA, the UK, South Africa, Philippines, China, and Russia. So when we have different promoters requesting judges fairly from out of country, this will add to our arsenal of qualified judges for championship fights, and he's proven to be successful under pressure on a regular basis.
Do you know if the applicant is planning on moving here?
No, he's not, sir.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, great. I do not have any further questions. If the commission doesn't, then I would look for a motion on new business item 1.
The conference is now in listen-only mode.
So moved.
Second.
And this is for approval?
Correct.
Okay. Motion for approval. We have a second. All in favor?
All right.
Great. Motion passes unanimously. Item 2, request by Robert Hoyle for a boxing referee license per NAC 467062. And I saw that Mr. Hoyle is in the audience today. And I can always
And what a crowd he gathers.
And I can always tell when he's in the house because there's nobody dressed better than Mr. Hoyle. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Commissioner.
Why don't you come on up here to the microphone? You're used to way larger crowds than this.
Thank you very much.
Can you just state your name for the record, please?
Robert Hoyle.
Great. So this is cool. I'm excited to have you in front of us. Tell me what you're thinking here. Why do you want to jump onto the dark side?
The dark side. Boxing has been a fantasy for me for years, and to be here in front of you guys today is mind-blowing. I feel like I'm in a dream. And my support cast that I have with me, Gil Cortez, Robert Bird, Kenny Bayless, Tim Cheatham, it's a blessing to have these guys come out and support me in my dream to become a boxing referee. I've been with the commission since '92 as an inspector, and I know you didn't ask me about my past, but
I want to hear it. Go for it.
Yeah, and since '92 as an inspector, I worked some amazing world championship fights in that capacity, and then moving forward under the direction of Mr. Mark Ratner, who's on the dark side now, as a judge. And I've learned a lot from him, and then moving forward with Mr. Bennett, this is really giving me a chance to facilitate and hone my skills and hopefully become a premier world championship referee.
Do you have intention to do both, or are you just going to want to move to the referee side and stay there?
My goal is to do both. I want to give the commission the opportunity to have as many tools as they have available, and since I'm still capable of judging, I would like to definitely offer this up to you as another option as a referee.
Wow, exciting. I have a couple more things for you, but any other commissioners have any questions?
I don't have any questions, but I do want to say thank you for your commitment to Nevada and interest in expanding your services with us.
Thank you.
Robert, I've always liked dual players, so that's good stuff.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, a guy that can play both ways, Coach, has a lot. Any questions from? No, very exciting.
Yeah, that's great.
So, do you think that you can keep up with being a two-way player is twice the commitment, it's twice the work. From what I know of you, I don't think there's a better guy. I was wondering why you brought the A-team today. I walked in here and ran into Kenny in the elevator, and I said, oh man, they must be here for something. I couldn't figure out what it was because I don't see them here very often, and I think that's really special that they came out and supported you. So how do you feel about taking on that dual role? Because if you're putting yourself out there, be careful what you ask for because you're going to get used.
Well, yes, I will, and I look forward to it because I've actually had the opportunity to work in this capacity in some of the fights that I've done internationally as a judge and a referee, where I refereed a co-main event and judged the main event. So this is something I'm familiar with. Boxing is a passion of mine. I tell you, these guys, they come out, we work together at the gyms or at our houses, you know, just talking about boxing and what we see and how we can make this better. I'm ready for it.
So am I going to be able to use you in both capacities in the same night? Do you need like the Superman phone booth to just change and then come back out in the suit and go back to the referee?
Just trying to answer your question.
Let the record reflect in a uniform.
That was not planned. Awesome. Okay, well, I don't have any other thing for you. Thank you for all the commitment. You know, even since I've been here, the relationship, the commitment, you're a consummate professional at every turn, at every step of the way. And, you know, appreciate your dedication to the commission. It's unparalleled. So, saying that, if there's no other comments or questions, I would look for a motion for approval on item number 2 for Mr. Robert Hoyle to become a boxing referee in the state of Nevada.
I make a motion, new business number 2, to approve Mr. Hoyle's boxing referee license for Nevada.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Top of that, he lost 40 pounds in the last 5 months.
You got it looking good, Joe. Shake. All right, moving on to item number 3. Nobody's here for item number 3, right? Hearing on the disciplinary complaint or in the alternative, hearing on a proposed adjudication agreement for mixed martial artist Khabib Nurmagomedov.
Morning, Mr. Chairman.
Morning, sir.
James Pisanelli on behalf of...
Thank you, Mr. Pisanelli, for being here. Is it Pisanelli or?
Pisanelli.
Pisanelli. Okay, good Italian. All right, thank you for being here. If it pleases you, I will let Mr. Detmer start the case, and he'll present, and then if you have anything to add, we'll go to your side. Okay, great, thank you.
And good morning, Chairman and members of the Commission. Mike Detmer from the Attorney General's Office on behalf of the Executive Director, Bob Bennett. In the matter of new business number 3, that being the proposed adjudication agreement for Khabib Nurmagomedov. On October 6, 2018, respondent Khabib Nurmagomedov competed in a contest during UFC 229 against Conor McGregor at the T-Mobile Arena. After he won the contest by submission, the respondent, while moving towards McGregor's corner, exchanged words with, pointed at, and threw his mouthpiece in the direction of the corner. Subsequent to that, he jumped over the octagon fence and jumped into the gallery where he engaged in a physical confrontation with a member of McGregor's team. On November 15, 2018, a disciplinary complaint was filed by the Executive Director. What is before the Commission today for his consideration is a proposed adjudication for the resolution of that complaint. Under the terms of the agreement, the respondent would be subject to a $500,000 fine, and that would be paid from a portion of the purse that is currently being withheld by the Commission, and with the remainder to be released. He would also be subject to a 9-month suspension. However, per the agreement, the parties are under agreement that the respondent would be eligible for a reduction in the length of the suspension if he was to personally deliver an anti-bullying message in a public service announcement. It is intended that this public service, this PSA, would be in collaboration with Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department and the UFC, and may be submitted to the Commission for its consideration. If the Commission is satisfied with the completed PSA, its distribution plan, the respondent may receive a reduction in the length of the suspension not to exceed 3 months. Now, this is a generalization of the primary terms of the proposed agreement. The terms themselves are stated more fully within the document itself, but I do, however, am available to answer any questions the Commission may have, and with that, I submit.
Okay, very straightforward. Are there any questions of any of the commissioners for Mr. Detmer?
Michael, the PSA, we will have a look at it before it's all approved and gone out and maybe it meets our identification of it?
That is correct, Commissioner Hall. It must be submitted to the commission. The commission must approve not only of the PSA itself, but also how it's going to be distributed to the public.
And at that time also determine the possible length of reduction.
So per the terms of the agreement, it would be a 3-month reduction. However, let's say he waits until month 8 of his suspension and then does the PSA, he would ultimately just get that 1 month off the entire term of the suspension.
Okay, thank you.
Tell me more about the PSA. So we're going to get a chance to look at it after it's already been done. And is that correct?
That is the intention, yes.
Okay, and then is this posted on a website, and it's up on a website for a day? Is this something that's going to be on local news? How is this going to be disseminated?
And that would go.
He stated we get to approve the distribution.
So they will submit a distribution plan to us with the recordation.
That is correct, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you.
Do you want to see you guys? Go ahead.
Is there an understanding that part of that distribution agreement is into our schools?
Again, that would be something that would be brought to the commission.
I think that that's good feedback for right now, because I had some of the same thoughts that, I mean, when I read this in general, the fine is heavy for misconduct, but the misconduct was also heavy. Unlike anything that I think I've ever seen since I've been here. Part 2, the time that you're proposing, I think, rides with, because the fine is so heavy, it might ride a little light, but I still don't have a major issue with it. And it is normal, at least from my recollection, and Executive Director Bennett, you can refresh my memory, or Mr. Detmer, that if a PSA is included of substantial value, we will reduce the time. That has been a practice of this commission for misconduct.
There have been prior instances. If you're referring to precedent in other cases where PSA has been done, that is my recollection.
Okay. And I think it would be good to, with approval or disapproval of this, wherever the commission decides to go, if we do approve it, I think we should provide some direction today, verbally, in the motion to Detmer and the defendant's attorney as it pertains to the detail that we would like to see in the PSA, not only in the message, which I think anti-bullying is what you stated, but also in distribution, and also to advise your client that has to get back here in time for approval if he intends to take the value of this for the full 6 months, which means you better turn the cameras on and start messaging this tomorrow. Otherwise, you're not going to make it. Because I need for our process, to schedule the public meeting, proper public notice for you to make this film or whatever this PSA is going to be, and get back in here. I believe it would be at the end of March, right? Is it April? March or April? If he worked himself down to 6 months, it's going to be April.
That would be correct, Chairman.
Okay, so you've got about a month to do this. Is that right?
It is.
Okay, so you've got about a month, if we agree on this, to do this, to get back in here on the April agenda. And if you want to take full value of it, that would be the client or your client's choice. It's just to make sure everybody understands the smoothness of the process to get to that point. And if there's an issue with the message or the distribution plan, then you might have to go do it again. So hopefully not. Hopefully it rides with the goals of what you guys have agreed to. But I think having the commission have a final say on that PSA and its distribution, that it's not a one-day website video and then it's gone. So, and I do like the idea of the schools, and I do like the idea of, we can't force the Clark County School District to distribute this, but we can certainly call them and work with them on how they would like to distribute it. So I think there needs to be some research, both on the defendant's side and on the UFC side, with the Clark County School District, on how that could be accomplished for distribution. because I don't think it's just as easy as, hey, we got this video, we want you to play it in all these classes. So you guys need to do some homework on that, I think, when you come back on some depth to that plan. Executive Director Bennett?
Yes, I would also add, what languages will it be in? In addition to English, Spanish, Portuguese, whatever you feel is appropriate for our review. Thank you.
And Chairman Morneau, I would be happy to make myself available as a commissioner with a background in advertising and marketing to review the distribution plan and content. Reach and frequency is the magic formula for awareness, so I'm happy to make myself available to both parties to ensure the delivery of a product that will be acceptable.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Detmer before we turn it over to Mr. Pisanelli? Mr. Pisanelli?
Here, Mr. Chairman.
Whatever's comfortable for you, it's microphone to both.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Mr. Detmer was fair in his recital of the facts the unfortunate facts that bring us here and the substance of the agreement. The Commission's points on the PSA are well taken. I think they're all fair. I think the general concept was agreed to, but if there's any spirit that runs through it is that there will be a lot of communication in advance rather than, as you said, spring something on you and it doesn't seem to hit the point that you're looking for, then everyone's wasting their time. So advanced communication, whether it be about language, distribution, or anything that would affect its effectiveness. We would be communicating with Mr. Detmer in advance. He, of course, would be communicating with you and the director to make sure that we're all on the same page as we move forward. But your points are well received, we understand.
Would it be acceptable to you if we approve this settlement agreement that we allow Commissioner Alonso to be the point through the process, just to ensure that when you get here for the Commission's approval, I think if the Commission, I've known Commissioner Alonso for a very long time, and she's very good in this, and she's not overbearing, and I think that she would be very fair as it pertains to the wording of the agreement, just to work with you in conjunction through the next 2-3 months as you work through this, and maybe provide some guidance so when you come before us, it's got a higher degree of surety that it's on track with what we were expecting.
And I think that's the most important point. I think it's a benefit certainly to us, but to the entire process to have Commissioner Alonso involved early rather than at the end. Her expertise is invaluable. We welcome it, and we thank you for offering that. So yes, we're fine.
Okay, well, on the language thing, is your intention that it's translated underneath, or is your intention that Khabib learns how to speak 4 languages in the next month?
As long as one of the languages is New York.
Okay. Okay, well then, I don't hear any issues with what's been proposed. I think we've created a pretty clear record of the expectations, so I would look for a motion on the approval of item number 3 as written, and Commissioner Alonso would be the point to work with Mr. Nurmagomedov and the UFC in creating this message and distribution plan.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great, motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Did you have anything else?
No, Chairman.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner.
You scared me for a minute. Okay, moving on to item number 4. Hearing on the proposed adjudication agreement for Abubakar Nurmagomedov. The second for the Khabib Nurmagomedov for possible action. Mr. Detmer.
Mike Detmer from the Attorney General's Office on behalf of the Executive Director Bob Bennett. In regards to new business item 4, proposed adjudication agreement for Abubakar Nurmagomedov. On October 6, 2018, the respondent, Abubakar Nurmagomedov, participated in UFC 229 as a second for Khabib Nurmagomedov in his contest against Conor McGregor. Following the contest and following Khabib Nurmagomedov jumping into the gallery of the T-Mobile Arena, the respondent and McGregor jumped upon the octagon fence where they proceeded to attempt to strike each other until they were ultimately removed by commission and/or security personnel and then separated. However, the respondent ultimately evaded this personnel and ran back to McGregor, where he re-engaged in the confrontation, and this resulted in a physical exchange until he was again separated. On January 10, 2019, Director Bennett filed a disciplinary complaint against the respondent as these actions constitute foul and unsportsmanlike conduct. Submitted for the Commission's approval today is a proposed adjudication agreement for the resolution of that complaint. Under the terms of the agreement, the respondent would be subject to a 12-month suspension dating back to the contest. It would expire on October 6, 2019. He would also pay a fine in the amount of $25,000 and remain suspended until this fine was paid in full or entered into a payment agreement with the Executive Director. Again, these are a generalized statement of the terms of the agreement. It's provided more specifically within the document itself. I remain available to answer any questions of the Commission. With that, I would submit.
Are there any questions from the Commission for Attorney General Demmer?
I guess I had one for Executive Director. This process, fine, suspension, sort of in line with other things you've seen? Obviously, this is behavior we haven't seen before, but how do you feel about the width of the fairway here with how we're approaching this?
I think it's a fair and equitable settlement agreement. It's unequivocally an anomaly as far as this type of action taking place in the past where the public is put at risk. So I think the settlement agreement fits the inappropriate behavior.
Thank you.
Commissioner, I would also add in support of Executive Director, I feel that the history of suspension period, I referred back to Bill Judah in April 2006, where Roger Mayweather, Judah entered into the ring and attempted to strike Roger Mayweather as a similar example, and that suspension period was 1 year. So that was my reference point in reviewing this agreement.
Any other questions? Mr. Pisanelli?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Mr. Detmer again has fairly recited, again, the unfortunate facts that bring us here. Mr. Nurmagomedov and has accurately recited the proposed agreement for the Commission.
Okay. Well, if there's no further questions, I would look for a motion on item number 4.
So moved.
A motion for what?
Approval.
Approval is presented. Thank you. Do you have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Aye, great. Any opposed? None? Okay, motion passes unanimously. Okay, item number 5. I have a cheat sheet on the names, in case you guys were wondering what takes me so long. Hearing on a proposed adjudication agreement for Zubaira who is a second to Khabib Nurmagomedov for possible action. Mr. Detmer.
And good morning, Mike Detmer from the Attorney General's Office on behalf of Executive Director Bob Bennett. As new business item 5, the proposed adjudication agreement for, I don't have your cheat sheet, Zubaira. On October 6th, thank you, Chair. Zubaira Hukov, otherwise referred to as respondent here and after.
Perfect.
He participated in UFC 229 as a second for Khabib Nurmagomedov in his contest against Conor McGregor. Following the contest and following Mr. Nurmagomedov's jumping into the T-Mobile gallery, the respondent also climbed upon the octagon fence where he struck and or attempted to strike Conor McGregor. On January 10, 2019, Director Bennett filed a disciplinary complaint against the respondent as these actions constituted foul and unsportsmanlike conduct. Submitted for the Commission's consideration today is a proposed settlement agreement for the resolution of that complaint. Under the agreement, you would be subject to a 12-month suspension which would expire on October 6, 2019. He also must pay a fine in the amount of $25,000, and he will remain suspended until that fine is paid in full or he enters into a payment plan approved by the executive director. Once again, this is a generalized statement of the terms of the agreement. The specifics are provided more fully within the document itself. I do, however, remain available yet again for any questions the commission may have, and with that, I submit.
Okay, are there any questions from the commissioners on item number 5? Pretty much consistent with prior, okay. Mr. Pisanelli?
Nothing to add, Mr. Chairman. I think that was again accurately recited in terms of the agreement.
All right, then I would look for a motion for approval then of item number 5.
Okay, motion to approve item number 5, the settlement agreement.
Great, do I have a second? Second. All in favor? Aye. Great, motion passes unanimously. Okay, moving on to item number 6. Mr. Pisanelli, thank you for your cooperation with the Attorney General and working with them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
This one I know how to pronounce. Hearing on the disciplinary complaint, item number 6. In the alternative, we're hearing on a proposed adjudication agreement for mixed martial artist Conor McGregor. Good morning, sir.
Good
Name
morning,
for the
Mr.
record.
Chairman. Michael Mersch for, on behalf of Mr. McGregor.
Good to see you, Mr. Mersch.
Good to see you too, sir.
You can go ahead and have a seat. Mr. Detmer, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chairman. As to new business item number 6, the proposed adjudication agreement with Conor McGregor. Mike Detmer, I'm from the Attorney General's office on behalf of Executive Director Bob Bennett. On October 6, 2018, respondent Conor McGregor competed in a contest against Khabib Nurmagomedov during UFC 229 at the T-Mobile Arena. Following the contest and after Khabib Nurmagomedov jumped into the gallery, the respondent jumped onto the octagon fence where he refused to comply with valid orders from commission inspectors to return back to the canvas. While the respondent straddled the fence, Abubakar Nurmagomedov also climbed onto the fence in close proximity to Mr. McGregor, at which point they attempted to strike or attempted to strike each other. They then proceeded in a physical confrontation until they were ultimately removed from the fence and separated by commission personnel and or security. On November 13, 2018, Director Bennett filed a disciplinary complaint against the respondent as his actions constituted foul and unsportsmanlike conduct. Submitted for the Commission's consideration today is a proposed settlement agreement for the resolution of that complaint. Under the terms of the agreement, he would be subject to a 6-month suspension dating back to the contest, so it would expire on April 6, 2019. He'd also pay a fine in the amount of $50,000 and will remain suspended until that fine is paid in full or he enters into a payment agreement with the Executive Director. Once again, these are a generalized statement of the terms. The specifics are provided more fully within the document itself. I, as always, remain available to answer any questions of the Commission, and with that, I will submit.
Great, thank you, Mr. Detmer. Are there any questions for Mr. Detmer from any of the commissioners? I'm assuming I have a question for you. I'm assuming when you took into account what you're recommending, that you're. This is kind of a question and a statement because I understand that the public may look at this one a little bit differently, but it's important to note that your, or it's a question, but I think I know this process well enough to know. Your recommendation is based on what happened from at the point the fight ended to the point that Charbez pulled Mr. McGregor back into the cage.
That is correct.
That's the context of the unsportsmanlike conduct.
That is correct, Chairman. That wasn't fair.
Do we have jurisdiction over what happened in New York City?
No.
We do not?
We do not.
Correct. Okay. And we don't really, that I'm aware of, although I don't agree with it, and I certainly don't like it, but the promotion itself and the language that is used, that is continuing to escalate year in and year out, while I don't like it, none of these settlement agreements take into account verbal statements made by parties to one another.
The proposed settlement agreements are specific to the conduct that happened at 229.
And are you aware, or maybe Executive Director Bennett, I'll ask you second, but are you aware of any time this commission has taken an action against an unarmed combatant in either boxing, MMA, or any other unarmed combat sport as it pertains to what they have said versus what they have done?
I'm not personally aware, no, Chairman.
Executive Director Bennett?
Chairman, no, I'm not aware of any, but I certainly think it's gotten to the point with some of the unarmed combatants where it's become totally unacceptable. There's not any other athletes that I'm aware of that have spoken in various press conferences in the way Mr. McGregor has. So although we have no precedence for it, I think it's something that we should look to in the future, and we should rein it in. His press conference at the Radio City Music Hall was obviously under the jurisdiction of the New York Athletic Commission. The one that took place here, his language was much cleaner, and I didn't see any reason to add that to the settlement agreement. But I definitely think unequivocally that that's something we need to be take a more active role in and hold fighters accountable for their language.
Okay, so in saying that, I think it's important to note that what you're recommending here is what I just stated. It is from the point the fight was over until what happened on top of the octagon, where he took a swing. And while I think we would all concur that the verbal part of the promotion, in my opinion, has gotten so out of line, it's embarrassing. But it would not be appropriate to insert that at this time, I think, until the commission gave some sort of guidance and/or warning and/or reg altercation that the fighters are now officially on notice, published through, the Nevada Athletic Commission regulation. It would be out of left field, I think, to just come in and insert that in at will, refer to that as maybe being arbitrary and capricious. I agree that we all don't like it. We'll table that for another time, where I think that we should take a look at how we want to address that. But I just think it's important for the public to note, as well as anybody else who's watching, that your recommendation is based on that 30 to 40 seconds, and the other stuff is either not in our jurisdiction or would break a lot of precedent and without notice that we're going to start fighting and or suspending for what you say versus what you do. So I think it's just important to get that on the record, so it's well understood. So are there any other questions for Mr. Demmer?
Just as a clarification, as Anthony Chairman Marnell pointed out, the time frame that you're assessing this for, you just mentioned 30 or 40 seconds. We all looked at a lot of videos. Is that your recollection of the time frame from when McGregor got up and order was restored? Is it a minute? Is it 30 seconds? I mean,
and so I've watched the same
we all have
multiple times from different angles, and as far as the duration of that time frame, I couldn't tell you specifically how long that was, but it's from when he gets up, goes to the fence, engages in the altercation, and this includes refusing to return to the canvas, and then just comes down from the fence.
So it's less than 2 minutes.
That is a safe.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I think what I was characterizing is, he was on the ground against the octagon. He's exhausted. He's done. He's been submitted.
Right.
He responds to obviously defend what's happening. He takes the first swing at, I believe it's.
Abubakar.
Say that again?
Abubakar.
Okay, Abubakar. At that point, they're both brought back down into the cage, and then Abubakar comes at him, and other people are coming from behind him, and he's just getting hit from everywhere at that point, trying to defend himself.
Right.
And the different choice that he could have made, which no MMA fighter is going to do, was just to sit there and not go engage. And I understand in the sport they're never going to do that. So that is why he's here today. If he would have not done anything, he wouldn't be here today. Right. Or this hearing wouldn't be taking place for this potential adjudication agreement or disciplinary complaint. So I just want to make that clear, because they are dramatically different, even though the world may see them as one and the same. Per our regulation, they are dramatically different. So are there any other questions?
I think, Chairman, since this has been somewhat changed to a discussion, amongst us, I would like to state that while I am clearly looking at that estimated time frame when Mr. McGregor got up to when he was pulled back down after engaging, the only thing stopping Mr. McGregor from putting the public at risk was Inspector Chavez Foger, because he pulled him back in. And in addition, that is the one limited incident we are discussing today. This is the second time Mr. McGregor is in front of us for conduct. And I think that will be taken into consideration. I will be taking that into consideration as a reminder this is his second time. The first being his incident with the water bottles with Mateus.
Okay. Anything else for the Attorney General? Mr. Mersch.
On behalf of Mr. McGregor, we are in concurrence with Mr. Detmer's recitation of the facts as are contained in the proposed settlement agreement, and don't have anything additional to add with respect to that. And I would applaud the Commission's, caution that they're exercising and not getting too far ahead of into areas where they haven't perhaps adjudicated in the past. But I welcome and I look forward to participating if the Commission is indeed looking forward into getting any new regulations perhaps or other direction on some of those other areas that you addressed, Mr. Chairman. But with respect to the matter that is presently before you today, Mr. McGregor supports and agrees with the Attorney General's presentation of the facts in the proposed order.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, well, I'm gonna close the hearing, and since we were having some comment there, is there anything else that any of the commissioners would like to discuss as it pertains to this?
No, just that I like the idea of taking a look at those further regulations and citing comments that all play into this.
Okay, then I'm going to move that to item I for matters for future agendas. We'll talk about that. Okay, well then I would look for a motion then on item number 6.
Move approval as presented.
We have a second for that.
Second.
Great, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, motion passes 4-1.
I thank the Chairman, I thank the Commission.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, just one personal. Just wanted to thank the Deputy Assistant Attorney General, Mr. Detmer. He's very professional and a pleasure to work with on behalf of the Executive Director, and I just thought that should be known for both you all and for his new boss, that he was a pleasure to work with.
Great, thank you. Okay, great. Moving on to item number 7, hearing on the extension of the temporary suspension for mixed martial artist Nicholas Busick for possible action. Mr. Detmer.
Thank you, Chairman. I apologize.
Apologize for what?
Well, not being quite organized just yet, but I'm here now.
Look at this. Stuff everywhere. Take your time, and when you're ready, you can start.
Thank you, Chairman. Mike Detmer from the Attorney General's Office on behalf of the Executive Director, Bob Bennett. In October 2018, respondent Nicholas Busick was licensed by the Nevada State Athletic Commission as a professional mixed martial artist. On October 19, 2018, prior to his contest at the Rio Hotel in Las Vegas, respondent submitted to a urinalysis from a representative of the Commission.
The UFC is where it is.
Commission's indulgence. Respondent's urinalysis reflected that his sample was urine substitute. Pursuant to NRS 467.117, Executive Director Bennett temporarily suspended respondent's license on January 20, 2019 for a period of 10 days. It is now being requested that the suspension be continued to resolution of the formal disciplinary complaint, formal disciplinary action, that is. The disciplinary complaint will be filed shortly, and absent unavailability of witnesses, we should be able to proceed to a disciplinary hearing at the Commission's next meeting. Proper notice of this hearing was provided pursuant to NRS 233B.121, with a registered letter being mailed to the respondent on January 4th, 2019 to the address he provided to the Commission. And with that, I submit.
Okay, great. Are there any questions on the request for extension? Okay, look for a motion.
Yeah, so moved.
Okay, so a motion to approve the extension of the temporary suspension. Do I have a second? All in favor? Aye. Great, motion passes unanimously. Item number 8, hearing on the extension of the temporary suspension for kickboxer Bruno Gazzani.
Good morning. I'm sorry. Good morning. Mike Demmer from the Attorney General's Office on behalf of the Executive Director. In November 2018, respondent Bruno Gazzani was licensed by the Nevada State Athletic Commission as a professional kickboxer. On November 16, 2018, prior to a contest at the Rio Hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada, the respondent submitted to a urinalysis from a representative of the Commission. The respondent's urinalysis reflected the presence of marijuana metabolites. Pursuant to NRS 467.117, Executive Director Bennett temporarily suspended the respondent's license for a period of 10 days on January 20th, 2019. It is now being requested that the suspension be continued through the resolution of the formal disciplinary action. The disciplinary complaint has been filed, and absent witness and unavailability issues, we should be able to go forward with the disciplinary hearing at the next scheduled meeting. Proper notice of this hearing was provided pursuant to NRS 233B.121 with a registered letter being mailed to the respondent on January 4th, 2019 to the address he provided to the Commission. And with that, I submit.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for the Attorney General Detmer on item number 8? Okay, so look for a motion to extend the temporary suspension for Bruno Gazzani.
I make a motion to approve the temporary suspension extension for kickboxer Bruno.
Have a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. Great, motion passes unanimously.
I thank the Commission.
Okay, it's now 9:45. I am going to take no longer than a 10-minute break to give everybody a chance, because I expect the next hearing is going to last a little bit longer than these. So we'll take a quick break and be back here in about 10 minutes.
Is that right?
Yeah, sorry. I'm based on
Or is she sticking around, or are you picking up?
I might stick around for a minute.
I know you like this legal mumbo jumbo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you haven't been here. Thank you, dude. Dr. Allen.
But instead of having someone else getting the same thing, it's getting between the middle right. Yeah, it's just they can't pump Randy Foster. And that's why. Part of it, they were new. It's not professional, but they've never been licensed, medical, all the different things that they're because it's a they're not used to that conduct you need to make it happen. Because they're used to they're used to jumping in fights. And if you look at their pit, it's excellent.
Yeah, I saw that. I like some of ours too.
It's familiar with all of these sticks that have to be put together before and also during the
Oh, that's for you to get it together with him. He's supposed to be here.
How are you?
Very good,
Very
sir.
dapper. Good to see you.
I know, put a coat on for him.
Well, it's 50 degrees outside.
What's that?
Oh, that's
Make these things.
Can you give it the same heads up I gave these guys? These are all streaming. Are you looking to come here? I'm already
Yeah, I just got my license last year. First show. Since the first show.
You need some more seats?
I'd love to come watch it. Just say, hey, listen, I can see this. 702-468-17. So it's a Saturday.
They did it next month. They went straight into it.
Marnell.
Oh, yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, it's not 5-hour meetings anymore. It's basically.
Oh, here's badass.
How are you?
What's going on? Hey guys, how are you? So, did you see Dawn?
She went, she's over there.
How are you? Oh, there you go. How are you? Yeah, I just got back. We did a karate show down in Hollywood last week. Karate combat, full contact. Based by some guys out of Wall Street. They did April, they did Miami, then they did Greece in June, they did top of the One World Trade Center in November, and then we did that one in March.
When it's full contact, open hand, when they say full contact, you can't punch.
You punch?
You punch?
Oh, yeah.
And it's pro?
Pro.
So the commission.
Yeah, I had to work with Andy quite a bit last week because of typical variations. And these guys had never been licensed. So on your side, they've never had any medicals, no MRIs, no anything. So we had to do a little pushing to that. The marketing team. Andy was actually down there because the Bellator fights.
Okay,
I think he had to land the next day. So they do it in the pit. You remember sort of Chuck Norris type?
Yeah.
A lot of them are point fighters that have turned to pro. So you get a little bit of that disengagement, some of that.
What did they do for referee?
Strength. Yeah. I want to get full disclosure.
Anybody within mic distance, I'm just letting them know.
Hear it?
Yes, I can hear it.
Nothing good comes from that. I just want to make sure. What is exactly? What just started?
Did you see the, it's funny, it's going to frame it such you manage that poor guy. All right. Let's do this documentary about cycling. Starting evenings.
Yeah.
I saw it. But you need to get to see before you can put time on it.
That's where I'm headed. I don't want to go that way. That's right on the
Couple times again.
Get started about 1 hour. Judo, Mayweather played 15 years ago, 10 years ago.
That's going to really hurt.
Microphone on? Oh, perfect. Thank you. Executive Director Bennett, are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Hammer, are you ready? Mr. Jones, is you and your team ready?
Yes, we're ready.
Okay, great. I'm going to start this off. It's going to take me a little bit, and then we'll get going. So I'm going to call item number 9, hearing on the application of Jon Jones for issuance of a license to engage in unarmed combat, to include discussion and deliberation regarding Jon Jones' United States Anti-Doping Agency in competition and out of competition anti-doping drug testing results. Some of you may have seen me walk up to Mr. Jones prior to this hearing, so I want to make sure it's clear to all of you what I told him. Number 1 is I'm happy he's here. It's a good step forward for him to appear. And number 2 is I told him to just relax. Not to relax because he's approved or unapproved, but to relax because today is going to take some time. And I wanted to assure him that he is going to be treated with the utmost respect in this hearing. Not all prior hearings of this commission have gone that way, and I will not tolerate any roughness, for lack of a better word, with our applicant. So, and I know that my commissioners feel the same way. This will be a respectful hearing. We're going to hear a lot of testimony. We're going to have a lot of dialogue, and at the end, we will conclude whatever the Nevada Athletic Commission feels comfortable. Just to make sure that that information is on the record. So, Mr. Jones, I reiterate that to you. Take a deep breath, relax. I'm glad you're here, and I look forward to getting through this. Before we get started, I do want to make a brief statement. So, and I don't have it written down. It's kind of in my mind, and it's kind of in my heart. I want it to be known as we led up to the fight and the results that came out, and in trying to work through your fight and your fight night, that I have been here now, I think approximately 5 or 6 years, and I won't say I've seen it all, but I've seen a lot. And this is a case like I've never seen. And there have been times, honestly speaking from my heart to all of you, that I've woke up the next morning after walking out of this commission meeting and felt, I don't know if I did the right thing. I guide my entire life on trying to do the right thing. And I know that Executive Director Bennett and the other commissioners here feel the same way. And the one thing that I will never sacrifice as chairman of this commission or as a commissioner is the integrity of this commission under any circumstance. However, your case is an anomaly. And the decision that we made to allow California to take this was one that was done out of conscience, not out of regulation. If we would have followed the regulation, and I do want to commend Executive Director Bennett in a way that he's probably never been commended by me as we were going through these discussions. If we would have just followed the book and not listened to a few of the expert witnesses that I understand are here today that we put the utmost trust in, your career would be over. You would be looking at a third offense and 18 months to life, and I would venture to say it would be a lot closer to life than it would be 18 months. And when we made that decision that Friday, the 21st, after hours and hours and hours of trying to understand this, it was one that said, we need to pause here for a minute. I don't have enough information. I do not understand this. I'm not going to allow this fight in the state of Nevada, and Executive Director Bennett and I completely concurred. But at the same time, I'm not going to ruin this man's career. And so here we are today. The decisions that were made after that evening were decisions that were made outside of our purview and our jurisdiction. We have no interest in those decisions. I don't care about those decisions. They're not my business. They're somebody else's, and they're yours in another state. And frankly, we felt, I think, reasonably more comfortable that that state had a much better understanding of what was going on with you and your, I'll call it, passport. And that leads me to the last thing. The only reason that we're here today, whether you buy into the fact that USADA is good or bad in its year-round, in and out of competition testing for the UFC, when that idea first came to this commission approximately 3 years ago, the whole idea of it was to self-regulate with regulators monitoring your self-regulation. The second biggest part of it was to develop a passport on every fighter in the UFC. If you did not have that passport today, we would not be having this hearing, because we would not have those results over the last 2 years. And I think it's important for people to note that that was the whole idea, was to develop a path, a science, a history on each individual body over a long period of time, each individual fighter over a long period of time. I'm not by any means saying that that system is perfect. I think there's still flaws in it. I think there's still things that need to be worked out. I think we have communication gaps between USADA, the commissions, etc. And it's also clear to know for people that what USADA's adjudication process internally has absolutely no bearing whatsoever on how the Nevada Athletic Commission feels about each individual case. And what we have said in the past is we will watch those adjudications, and we have followed this. If we're comfortable with those adjudications, then there's no reason to hear the case twice. We let the self-regulation do its job, and we move on. This is a particular case where we have a licensee now that's coming before us that has a passport. There's some science that we need to understand and digest today, and we'll move forward. So that's my opening statement to everybody. I appreciate everybody making the effort on short notice to get here. I wanted you to understand how it got to today. And so what I would like to ask of the applicant is, how many people do you have on your behalf today that you would like to speak?
When you say on our behalf, I mean, we have Mr. Jones and myself. I mean, we'd like to have testimony from Dr. Reichner and Dr. Fedoruk. They're certainly not our witnesses in that sense. Beyond that, I don't think we have...
There are no witnesses here today. There's just testimony on behalf of the medical, the science part of this. Sure. This is not an adjudication hearing, it's a licensing hearing. So we obviously have this issue, which we all understand is the M3 metabolite from oral turinabol, and the idea of what I'm going to call residual, or all these different words that have been used, but I'm going to use the term residual. So I want to know, because I want to try to structure the hearing in a way that makes sense, where you have the ability, and I first would turn it over to you and your client to make any statements that you would like. Second, what I would like to do is I would like to bring forward any expert witnesses, which we all want to hear from, and have the ability for them to either make a statement, and then this commission has a tremendous amount of questions for them.
Okay.
And then third, any recommendations you have on how you would like to see this structured.
Sure. I'd like to do an opening statement with your permission.
Yes.
And then I think it makes sense at that point to have Dr. Eichner, since he's here in person, be the next person to speak. I'd like to ask him some questions, but I'm happy to defer to the commission to ask questions first if that's what you prefer. And I could always step in and ask him. I'm prepared for anything today. So we just want to make sure we do everything the commission wants us to do so that you leave today with enough information to feel like you can make a decision. So, and then we have Dr. Matthew Fedoruk as well on the phone from London, who's available to testify after Dr. Eichner.
Is Mr. Cook here from USADA as well?
Mr. Cook is here as well.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, that would work. We'll let you do an opening statement. Then we'll bring forward each of the, I would say, Dr. Eichner, Dr. Fedoruk, and potentially Mr. Cook from USADA. We'll let the commission ask its questions first, and then give you the opportunity to ask questions to fill in any gaps that you think we have missed, or to make your point versus the point that may be being made up here.
The only other point to address is Mr. Jones, in terms of him making a statement. He's certainly happy to make a statement. I think it's important for him to explain to you why he wants to fight in Nevada. That's something he made clear to me last night. It's a different type of place to fight than anywhere else. So I can have him make that statement in the beginning or in the end, however you prefer.
It's totally up to you.
Okay. Well, why don't I give an opening statement, and then you'll hear from Mr. Jones, and then we can have Dr. Eichner come forward.
That's fine. The only other thing I would need to ask is, so the first thing I need to do is I'm going to take item number 9 and all of the information that you submitted to us and admitted into evidence. So it's on our record.
Okay.
Second thing I'd like to do is, of the people that you've identified, do we need to swear any of these people in?
That's at your discretion,
I'd like to do that. So anybody that's here in person, I believe it would be Dr. Eichner and Mr. Cook from USADA. Is that correct? Are they here?
Yes.
Can you guys just come up here real quick, and then we'll let you sit down. Mr. Jones, you also are going to be providing information as well. Would you mind swearing in the 3, and then the gentleman on the phone, I guess.
I don't believe Dr. Fedoruk's on the phone yet. I think
he's not. Okay.
He's available and ready to be on the phone when we need him.
Okay, if we need him when we get to him. So I would let you go ahead and swear these witnesses in, please.
All right, gentlemen, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
I do.
Okay, great. I'll turn it over to you. Real quick, does that satisfy you, Mr. Detmer, about procedure and the way we're going to go about this?
Yes, Chairman.
Okay, great. Turn it over to you.
Good morning.
Please state your name for the record.
Sure. My name is Paul Green on behalf of Jon Jones here today in Mr. Jones's licensing reissuing hearing. I just want to thank Mr. Bennett and the Commission for allowing Mr. Jones this opportunity today. I know how much it means to him to have the opportunity again to fight in the state of Nevada. He is currently scheduled to fight on March 2nd. I don't think that's a secret. It's been announced here in Las Vegas, and defend his UFC light heavyweight title against Anthony Smith. Mr. Jones filed a submission, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, on Friday in advance of today's hearing, along with a list of exhibits 1 to 11, and a list of anticipated witnesses. The idea behind filing the submission in advance was so that the Commission could have all the science in its hands before the hearing, and hopefully that was allowed everyone to better understand what is a complicated issue. Obviously, Mr. Jones is here today with the hope that the Commission will rely on the science detailed in the submission that the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency relied upon in determining in December that Mr. Jones has not committed an anti-doping rule violation since July 2017, which is a violation for which he's already been punished. The science that the California State Athletic Commission relied on, and I understand that that's a different jurisdiction, but we believe it's relevant nonetheless in the sense that they reissued his license relying on the same science. And of course, he fought on December 29th against Alexander Gustafsson and recaptured the light heavyweight championship in Inglewood. Mr. Jones believes that it would only be fair to have his license reinstated because his continuing presence of picogram levels of what is known by anti-doping scientists as the chairman referenced, the M3 metabolite in his urine. It remains unknown how long this stuff will stay in his urine. And it's possible he could continue to test the picogram levels for years to come through no fault of his own. Some dates to focus on today. July 28th, 2017. That's an important date. That's the time when Mr. Jones tested positive for the M3 long-term metabolite of the prohibited drug called oral turinabol. It was during his in-competition test following his bout in UFC 214. The amount measured was estimated at is an extraordinarily low level. It's 20 to 80 picograms, and what does that mean? A picogram is 1/1,000,000th of a gram. I'm certainly not a scientist. Dr. Eichner can better explain what that means, but I've heard it referred to as a splash of salt in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. That's how little this amount is. September 18, 2018, renowned sports lawyer and arbitrator Richard McLaren issues a decision in Mr. Jones's case involving the July 28, 2017 positive. He sanctions Mr. Jones for 15 months for the M3 metabolite, and most importantly, Mr. McLaren determined there was absolutely no intent on Mr. Jones's part to use a prohibited substance. And in fact, USADA never took the position that there was any intent. That was never part of the hearing itself. The whole issue was whether or not he could get a reduction without showing source. And in fact, Mr. McLaren found that he could, reduced him to 15 months. He found that Mr. Jones was a truthful witness who recognized he can only improve by being an exemplary, drug-free fighter in the future. Mr. McLaren wrote of Mr. Jones that he needed the opportunity to regain his dignity and self-esteem by fighting again, recognizing that this is what Mr. Jones does, how he makes his living, how he identifies himself in the world, and as you'll hear from him, how important it is for him to once again fight in Las Vegas versus anywhere else. December 20, 2018, USADA notifies the commission that it would not charge Mr. Jones with a new UFC anti-doping policy rule violation, notwithstanding the detection of the M3 metabolite in his urine on 3 separate occasions. One was August 29th, one was September 18th, and one was December 9th. In his letter to the commission, attorney Jeff Cook, who is here today, it's Exhibit 2 of the submission, wrote that the presence of the M3 metabolite was not consistent with re-administration of a prohibited substance, and this very low level would not result in any performance enhancement in relation to Mr. Jones's upcoming bout. Because USADA did not believe there was any reasonable basis to proceed with a new rule violation, USADA did not initiate proceedings under the UFC anti-doping policy. USADA's decision to not charge Mr. Jones with another anti-doping rule violation, despite the continued presence of the M3 metabolite at picogram levels, was based on the opinions of 3 world-renowned anti-doping experts, one of whom is here today, of course, Dr. Eichner, the president of the WADA accredited laboratory in Salt Lake City, the Sports Medicine Research and Testing Laboratory known as SMERTL. He will testify in person, and well, he'll be here in person to speak to the commission. His December 20th opinion letter is Exhibit 3. Dr. Larry Bowers was the second world-renowned anti-doping expert. He's the former chief science officer for USADA. He unfortunately could not be here today. His opinion letter from December 20th is Exhibit 4 of Mr. Jones' submission. And Dr. Matthew Fedoruk, USADA's current chief science officer, who's also available to testify, as we had said, by phone. He did not file anything in writing, but he can explain to you the basis of his opinion by phone today. Dr. Eichner's opinion in sum was there's no evidence that oral turinabol, also known as DHCMT, was re-administered after July 28, 2017, and this would include the period from October of 2017 to August of 2018 when there was no testing done by USADA through no fault of Mr. Jones's doing. He just wasn't tested. But there's no evidence in that period, as Dr. Eichner said in that letter, and he can reiterate again today, that there was any use in that period. It's just that he wasn't tested. He believed that the amount was residual from prior to July 28, 2017, primarily because there was only this long-term metabolite detected. There was no short-term metabolite or parent compound. And if there had been re-administration, there would have been evidence of both, the parent and the short-term. And also his first test back on August 9th was negative. And perhaps you can ask Dr. Eichner if that test had been different. If that first test had been positive, he might have a different opinion. The M3 metabolite remained in Mr. Jones' body, and it's been described as pulsing or coming out somehow Not 100% sure myself on the science here, and I look forward to Dr. Eichner explaining it. But somehow it stays in your body and it comes out in different ways. One of the theories is that it comes out when you drop weight, which would explain why on December 28th, the day he weighed in, he was negative. I mean, he was positive. Sorry, the next day on the 29th, he was negative. So a fourth world-renowned anti-doping science expert, Dr. Brian Ahrens, who heads the other WADA-accredited lab in the U.S., and there are only two, Smyrtle and UCLA. He heads the UCLA lab, told the California State Athletic Commission he agreed with Dr. Eichner and Dr. Bowers and Dr. Fedoruk, and that's at Exhibit 10. So we have the two directors of the two WADA-accredited laboratories in the United States, the current and former chief science officer at USADA, as the four scientific opinions who are saying Jon Jones did not take this again, and he shouldn't be continued to be punished or denied the opportunity to fight based upon this continued presence of the M3 metabolite. And because there's uniform agreement that this level, which is a trillionth smaller than a gram, is the result of re-administration, Mr. Jones hopes Nevada will follow California's lead and accept these findings. He obviously is here today hoping that his license is reissued today. And I think it's important to understand the opinion of these four scientists is that there's no way he could gain any performance-enhancing advantage by the presence of this picogram level. So let's say he tests positive again on March 1. When I say test positive, I mean the presence is still there at this picogram level the night before this fight or the night of the fight. There would still be no performance-enhancing advantage. And as far as our proposal, we would propose what we agreed to with California, which is in essence that as long as Dr. Eichner or whoever we wanted to agree upon as an expert would look at the results and say this is still the continued presence and not re-administration, it would not be viewed as an additional anti-doping rule violation. That's the position California is taking, and we believe it's a reasonable position to take in light of the science that's being put forth. Obviously, we're prepared to answer any questions regarding the submission before I call Mr. Jones, and I'm happy to do that if you think it would help.
Are there any questions from any commissioners on the opening statement from it's Mr. Green, correct?
Yes.
From Mr. Green? I will let you proceed.
Mr. Jones, you're under oath. I'm just going to ask you a few questions, and you can just look at the commission. And again, we're not in an adversarial hearing today, so be yourself, despite the fact that there's a voting camera. Okay.
You might have to move the microphone
Sure.
to the middle without pulling it out. Oh, perfect.
So the first thing, John, just to be clear, at any point in your life, did you ever intentionally take oral turinol?
No.
Do you have any idea how this stuff ever got in your body?
No.
Why are you here today wanting to fight in Nevada? I mean, you have your license in California, you've already fought in California. Why is Nevada so important for you?
Fighting in Nevada is extremely important to me. I believe it's the fight capital of the world. One of my personal goals since day one has been to just be like a mainstream athlete, catapult the sport, bring more awareness to mixed martial arts. And I think doing that, being able to fight in Las Vegas is obviously going to help me do that. People in Nevada love mixed martial arts. They're some of our most loyal fans. And I just think it would be really sad to not get the fans what they want to be a part of fight that.
You've already agreed to voluntary testing as part of your agreement with California. Would you agree to continue to be tested voluntarily if the Nevada Commission wanted you to do that too?
Absolutely.
Any questions for Mr. Jones?
I'll let you finish.
I think that's all we want to say.
Okay. Are there any questions from any of the commissioners of Mr. Jones at this time? If you don't ask them at this time, it does not mean that's your last chance to ask Mr. Jones any questions. I think we'll certainly conclude with Mr. Green and Mr. Jones after we get through the experts that will be called forward. So if you're not ready, that's fine. And if you are ready, please ask.
And I will ask Mr. Green, because it was included in your opening statement and the submission that is now in evidence. I guess I'm cautious to hear the words "through no fault of his own." And while it's never been proven, confirmed, at some point an illegal substance got into Mr. Jones' system.
Can I clarify what I meant there?
Yes, please.
What I meant was that it continues to be in his system now through no fault of his own, meaning this is not a typical substance, a substance that remains in your system for almost 2 years after it was initially ingested, whenever that was, prior to July 2017. That's what I meant to clarify. I should have probably written it more clearly. But I didn't mean that there was no fault initially, and certainly Jon would tell you he was at fault for what happened. I don't think anyone's trying to say that he didn't make a mistake initially.
Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Appreciate the clarification.
Could you just expand on that last comment about making a mistake initially? Because I'm under the impression that there is no source.
Well, I'm not saying a specific mistake. I mean, whatever happened, we don't know where it came from. I mean, we tested all the supplements, and we just don't know what happened. But what I mean is, Jon, I mean, every athlete who ultimately tests positive or something has to take responsibility for that, and that's part of the strict liability standard. So that's whether he intended to do it or not, which he clearly did not. It's still his fault that it somehow ended up in the system.
Thank you for that clarification.
Mr. Hull, to me, that's one of the problems. This is not a standard problem because it's a black market drug. And so there aren't enough tests that have been done to, define its purposes, how long it lasts, and that's the problem, that we're having, obviously, and obviously is the victim. But it's not a standard doping violation that we can go and say, hey, this is, this is prohibited. So this is, it's backed our asses right in the corner. And you too, and Jon, I hear you loud and clear. I mean, you're a hell of an athlete, but there's nothing standard about this.
I think that's right, and certainly Dr. Eichner can testify a lot better than me. My degree was certainly not in anything close to his, so I was a lawyer. I did not do very well in science, so I went to law school. I think he's the better one to answer those questions than me.
Okay, I only have one question, and I think it would, be appropriate to move on to Dr. Eichner's testimony for statements, and can answer probably a lot of the different questions that we have. But Mr. Jones, from what I've gathered here, and I'm summarizing, that you have at times throughout your career taken a tremendous amount of supplements. I think I read 14 that was going on, but you had a nutritionist, you were monitoring those. Since the oral Turinabol long-term metabolite M3 has been showing up here, in the last 90 days, 180 days, do you have a current supplement list that you are taking?
Yes, I do.
You do. So you're still taking some supplements, approved supplements. And I don't want to know what they are, but about how many are you currently taking?
Currently about 4.
So you're down to 4? Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I can represent that they're all certified supplements now, so I'm making sure of that.
And when you say certified, is that because it's approved on the list? Or are you actually taking the supplement, having it tested before he starts taking that specific lot?
Yeah, they're NSF certified or batch tested. I'm not sure if it's NSF or Informed Sport, but one of the batch testing certified. I don't know if anyone anywhere is testing all their supplements in a lab before they're taking them. As far as I know.
And nobody else is dealing with this issue, so.
True, but as far as I know, and he is not the only athlete dealing with it, but there are others in different sports. But as far as I know, there's never been a positive test in any of the professional sports who all give their athletes third-party batch tested supplements. So I think it's about as safe as you can do.
Yeah, the supplements I take are mainly for neuron rejuvenation, brain health type things.
Okay.
Omegas and things like that. Very generic.
Okay, great. Well then, if you're ready to call Dr. Eichner, I think it would be so appropriate to call Dr. Eichner, and maybe if it's fine with you, Mr. Jones can take a back seat. So,
sure.
Because Mr. Eichner might be standing here a while, and I'd like him to be able to be comfortable. And if we need to have Mr. Jones come back forward, we can.
You want Dr. Eichner to sit here?
That'd be great.
Okay.
Morning, Dr. Eichner.
Good morning.
Can you just give your name for the record, please?
Daniel Eichner.
Wonderful, thank you. I would turn it over to you if you'd have any opening statements you'd like to make. You've obviously been involved with this from, back in December. And if you do not, then I'm going to open it up for the commission to start going through some questions. But I would like to allow you the opportunity to make a statement in case you want to lay any groundwork or framework about what we're discussing here today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have nothing prepared. I'm here on behalf to try to assist with this program, and I want to make it very clear that I have no horse in this race. I'm here to be truthful and honest and try to walk through what we do know and what we don't understand about DHCMT or oral Turinabol.
That's great, and after working with you for the time that I have, as well as Executive Director Bennett, I wouldn't expect anything less from you. So I appreciate you making the time and the effort to get here. I know you have an unbelievably busy schedule, and you're a very sought-after individual as it pertains to the world of anti-doping. So thank you for being here. So with that, I would turn it over to any of the commissioners to start asking some questions. I would just ask, we'll just be respectful of each other. And is anybody that'd like to go first? Dr. Macbeth, would you like to start us off? So let you start it off, and let's try not to ask the same question twice, but if we need some clarification, then we'll go from there.
Well, good morning, Dr. Eichner, and thank you very much for coming and testifying and helping us figure this out. And also, thank you for all your lifetime work in this area, and I've read some of your studies and great contributions. So I think it would be helpful for the commission if we kind of asked a few basic questions first and kind of level set things. So in fact, we could start with with the lab, SMRTL, and how the lab is currently going about testing for the anabolic steroid, DHCMT anabolic steroid, otherwise known as Turinabol. What is the metabolites that you're checking? How many of them? We'll start with that question.
Sure, thank you very much. We have learned a lot about how to detect oral Turinabol better in the last 4 or 5 years. And so with the identification of what we've been deeming as long-term metabolites, and the most common one that everyone is talking about is the M3 metabolite. Some labs will call it the M4, but the M3 is probably the best way to define it. That's a relatively new metabolite that's been identified. Importantly, when that was identified in the paper through the Moscow lab, through Sobolevsky and Rychenkov, what their study intended to do was identify the longest term metabolites for oral Turinabol. And importantly, the study did not look at how long those metabolites were detected in urine. And so that's a very important piece to understand with detection, is that we know now what a very good long-term metabolites are. However, we don't have an exact time frame on how long they can be detected. And so the World Anti-Doping Agency will accredit laboratories around the world. I believe there's about 30 throughout the world, 2 in USA and 1 in Canada, so 3 North America total. No lab does it exactly the same way. So some labs will look for the parent compound, which is indicative of very recent use. They will all look for the M3, which is right now known to be the longest lived metabolite. And then there's some short-term and intermediate metabolites that can also be detected, but again, some of these ones are recently identified, and when we're dealing with a drug that hasn't been FDA approved, you can't get ethical approval to do the necessary studies to actually work out what the detection window is on some of these in urine. So, to answer your question, not all labs are looking for all the different analytes for oral Turinabol, but everyone should be looking for at least the parent in the M3 metabolite.
To that point, are the 3 North American WADA certified labs all testing for the short and midterm metabolite in addition to M3?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, and the purpose of testing for multiple metabolites in a sample?
So the laboratory, again, receives samples totally de-identified. We just get numbers. We have no idea who they come from. And our job in different programs, we work through the Olympic movement and through professional sports, law enforcement and other programs, is to offer our clients the best way of detecting someone who's abusing drugs. And so the parent and the short-term metabolites are great for identifying recent use, if they're getting an enhancement recently on those ones. And the M3 is a fantastic analyte for looking for someone who's ceased using a long time ago. And so the advantage of doing an array of metabolites, both very short-term, short or intermediate, and then long-term, is that we can then get a better idea on when someone might have used. And the best example would be if we see the parent compound coming in and we see the short and intermediate term metabolites, we know that's very recent and probably within several days of use. If we don't see parent, but we see other of the short-term metabolites, then it might be a week or two. And then if we go out and we only see the M3 metabolite, we know it hasn't been used for a while. And that's all we can pretty much say on that one.
So a question around the science on that, because I think it's important that we all have a good sense around the short and long-term, the parent short-term and middle metabolites, as far as being confident that that we understand the maximum length of detection for those metabolites. We understand that there's confusion right now, or lack of science around this longer M3 metabolite. But could you make a comment around your confidence in the science around the short and midterm metabolites?
There is more data on the parent and the short-term metabolites purely because they've been tested for decades. So this isn't a new substance. It's been around for a long time, I believe developed by the East German doping machine, and so it's been around for decades. So there is a lot of data on the parent and the short-term metabolites purely because it's been tested for it in athletic samples for decades. And so there was a lot more known on how long those ones last, and they're relatively short-lived. That's why the identification of the long-term metabolites was such a great scientific discovery, because it changed from several days or a week to a lot longer.
Okay, so is it, as far as I can see in all of the test results, Mr. Jones has never tested positive for a parent short-term or long or intermediate-term metabolite. Is that your understanding?
Again, all the data that I've been provided for review, only the long-term M3 metabolite has been present. No other metabolites or analytes I've seen present in the data that's been presented to me.
Okay, so as a commissioner looking to ensure the safety of fighters in the ring, and I have a question for you with regards to the, I think it's Jones Exhibit number 3. It is your letter back to Mr. Cook, dated December 20th, 2018. And I think Mr. Green referenced it in his opening comments, which was the question Mr. Cook asked you, is the December 9th test result an indication of further additional exposure to DHCMT since the July 2017 adverse finding? And I'll just quote the response: there is no evidence that DHCMT has been re-administered. The most likely interpretation of these data is residual levels from previous exposure. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So when I looked at the actual dates of the tests that you supplied in this letter, I noticed that there was a actual 10-month period of time in which no testing of Mr. Jones took place, and I think that is between the test of October 11th of 2017 through August.
August
August 9th of 2018. Is that correct?
I see that, yes.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, sorry, Doctor, is that the data was provided to me. We have no way to link all these data with an athlete. So the data was provided to me. We can't generate this ourselves, because if you look at the sample number on the second left column there, that's all we have. We don't have access to other laboratories, so if you look in the labs, you know, if it's come from a different lab other than Smyrtle, we don't have that data. And then also we would have no way to link it with any athletes. So importantly, this data was provided to me.
Okay, duly noted. So I'd like to ask the question just a little bit different. Could there have been a re-administration or re-ingestion of Turinabol at some point during the 10-month period where Mr. Jones was not tested, and still be consistent with the lab findings that were positive in August of 2018, September of 2018, and December of 2018?
I mean, could it have there been any exposure during that period? Yes.
And still have, and the lab results, positive lab results that we got, still be consistent with that re-exposure?
It would really depend upon whether, how much exposure or administration, the frequency of that as well. So there, I mean, you know, you're asking a great question, but there's so many caveats that I'd have to display for that answer, because without knowing how it was used, how often it was used, even the route of administration, all I could do is tell you, is it possible? Yes.
So it's possible to detect that, and it would be consistent with the lab tests that we had in August, September, and December.
And now you make me go through the caveats. So, you know, if I look at the data presented, and if we have a negative test towards the beginning of August in 2018, well, I'm very confident it wasn't used recently before then. And so, you know, if you then ask me, is it possible he had exposure, you know, closer to that October 2017 test, and will you still only see the M3 metabolite later? Sure.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to yield my time back to some of the other commissioners. I have a couple more questions for you, but let them have a chance.
I don't have any questions. I'd just like you to maybe clarify some framework, and then I'll turn it over back to my fellow commissioners, because it's something I've been trying to digest and understand since this happened. You say that we have a lot of information on oral Turinabol and the shorter term or mid-term metabolites. One of the big questions for me is understanding that. Let's start off with ingestion of oral Turinabol. From what I've been able to digest or read, that core compound substance, I'm not using the right words, is out of your system and undetectable how far from ingestion? Approximately, I'm not asking for definitives, but is it 2 days? Is it 2 weeks? Is it 10 days? About what is that?
And again, it would depend on the amount of exposure or administration and the frequency. But if you're looking at the parent compound, for example, we're probably talking days. And if we're looking at some of the short-term metabolites, we're talking a week or two. And as far as the intermediate metabolites go, we're in the same boat as we are with the M3, which is we don't know exactly.
Okay, so if I ingested the parent compound at some level, an approximation would be within a number of days the parent is gone, and let's just say it takes a week for the parent to be gone, and then it would take another 2 or 3 weeks, and the more mid-term, short-term metabolites are gone. Did I restate that correctly?
No, I think the parent and in the short term would fit under that scenario, and then the intermediate metabolites would likely be detected longer. But, you know, is it a few months or not? I'm not sure on that one.
Okay, that's helpful. And then as it pertains to the M3 metabolite, I think you stated this in the beginning, we have no idea. there's no science around how long that N3 metabolite can continue to show up.
I mean, I think saying no idea is a little harsh. We don't know exactly how long it is, but in the last 4 or 5 years, we've been involved in dozens of cases where we have longitudinal data on individuals. The important thing to remember is that these aren't controlled experiments where they're locked in a room and we know exactly what they're taking and not taking. But, you know, through experience with other cases, looking at the longitudinal data, you know, there is definitely evidence that the M3 metabolite can be detected for a very long period of time.
And I believe in the study you referenced about the Germans and the doping ring and all that good stuff that I read on, it looked like in that study, I thought I recall seeing around 250 days is where the longest that was detected of the M3 metabolite. Am I recalling that correctly? Maybe we might get somebody else here today that would know that more.
Can you, if you can be a little more specific on which study you're talking about, I can probably help.
They only gave me 12, and I tried to read them all. I had no idea what I was reading, but I did the best that I could.
Okay, sorry. And this is the Sobolevsky-Rodchenkov
Yes, sir.
study that was specifically looking to identify the long-term metabolites?
Yes, sir.
And so I know they did put some approximate days in here that they think would be detectable, but, you know, fantastic research here. But, you know, if we try to overinterpret any numbers out of here, I think, you know, we're doing a disservice to the study. It really was to identify the novel long-term metabolites. And the numbers they've given in here, and I believe it was 50 days they mentioned, we know that's not true.
I thought I read in that study, though, that there were some of the people that were tested that did go much further out than that. Maybe I'll look for that, but okay, I don't want to distract from my other commissioners. I'll turn it over to you guys, and I'll do some.
But maybe, Doctor, and let me start by saying thank you for willing to come and participate in this today. But maybe asking the chairman's question a different way, knowing that you just look at sample numbers and not individuals, and so over the last 4 or 5 years that you have been studying, what is the longest time period that it has been in the system from your sample studies? That's asked differently, maybe.
So one of my clients has been generous enough to let us discuss one of their matters that they've had, and we know of a case, and again, important to remember, these aren't controlled administration studies. We don't know exactly how much and the frequency they used. All we have is the data after they've been tested. And, you know, there's cases where people have been tested 10 plus times per year, and it's still detectable, just the M3 metabolite, at varying, very low concentrations. So sometimes it's identifiable and sometimes it isn't, for well over 2 years.
Thank you. I'm going to keep going if it's okay with the other commissioners.
Please do.
Thanks. And at any time I ask you a question on behalf of Smyrtle that's more appropriate for Mr. Cook on behalf of USADA, please just let me know, because the lines were blurred as I was preparing my notes. I'm going to kind of step back a second like Dr. Macbeth did. During the, when this first broke, there was, I think, a lot of confusion whether the test results were atypical or adverse. And this is where I'm going to say maybe this is more Mr. Cook and not you, let me know. But I'd like to, I guess, start by understanding, based on reading the anti-doping policy on behalf of the UFC, at any time was of Mr. Jones' test considered atypical and then changed to adverse?
I can be very clear on that. Under the defined as ever be considered for UFC, but laboratory, if the sub at any concentration.
Questions for them. Aware of any other prohibited substance that has the potential
why I'm laughing is that several years ago we had another substance. We had some anecdotal evidence through cases that, and then we were able to track, we tested them out, and our hypothesis was correct. It is, and in fact, and subsequent study, colonial identified that it was sequestered by cells has a, more than the other meldonium, awful long time, or ultra to be done, but they haven't shown. I suspect that it's sequestered and then can come out later. And as far as your, that can be detected for over 12 months, but if you take specific gravity into account, the concentrations tend to go down over time, even though it's detected for an awful long period of time. Something like ultra-anabol, we don't know what's getting sequestered, and so could it be in the fat cells, could it be in some other tissue?
Mean in terms of this report?
So again, it has a specific definition for the WRITER code of the International Standards for Laboratory. The common phrase would be positive. That would be the common name. You'd say this is positive for M3. In our world, we use it as an adverse analytical finding. And importantly for us, it's an adverse analytical finding, and then the results management process takes over whether it's an anti-doping rule violation. Ours is very clear how we report it.
Thank you.
What's your opinion on the life cycle of the benefits of this drug? Time frame. Obviously, it stays there for 2 years. What's the time frame of the benefits, if any?
So again, not fully knowing the mechanism of where it's sequestered and why it's detected for such a long period of time, and the fact that we're only seeing the M3 long-term metabolite coming out in these matters, what biological function does that M3 metabolite have? Is it still able to offer an ergogenic aid? I mean, there's no data to support that it would. And so
that it would?
That it would.
At these levels?
That the M3 metabolite, excuse me, there's no evidence that the M3 metabolite is ergogenic. So it's a metabolite, it's a piece of the parent compound, and there's no evidence that it actually is performance